Welcome to this tutorial video in the series of simple yet engaging interactions built using ZebraZapps. I'm your guide, Ethan Edwards. In this one, we're going to build a simple drag and drop sequencing exercise where the learner has to put things in the correct order in a sequential way. So let's get going. So here's our finished application. We've got 5 pictures of Betty Crocker through the years, and the task for the learner is to drag them in the order in which they were used. So the oldest one first. So trying to put these in chronological order based on styles. When all the pictures are placed, you check the answer, and then you can be told if you were right or not. The correct path, get all the pictures in the right order, and it identifies that you have them all correct. So that's what we're going to build. Okay, well, let's start out with a new project. Go ahead and name it Sequencing Activity. We will go with the standard 800 by 500. And the first step is let's just import the media that we're going to need. So click the plus in the library. And you should have a folder that has a bunch of resources in. So select them all and just import them. They'll come into your asset library. And now the first thing we want to do is build our Plaid background. We're going to use the polygon tool. Make sure that it's set to 4 sides. And go ahead and drag to create that square. Notice that the tools by default require you to make them uniform. But if you go to the Geometry tab, there's a Keep Aspect Ratio property that if you switch that to false, then you can change your rectangles into actual rectangles rather than keeping them squares. Also go to the Appearance tab and you'll see there's a Fill Graphic ribbon. So grab the gingham, and if you hover over there and get the construction tape and release, that will become the fill pattern for that rectangle. We'll get rid of the border, and then we can lock that toolbox, so we're never going to have to deal with the background again. Now next, there's a text file that has the basic instructions in it, so open that and copy those words, and then create a text object and paste in that copy. So there's our text. We want to put it on a white background, so we'll go to our inspector, set the fill opacity of that text object to 100. Also give it a shadow to pull it up off that tablecloth. You can set it to whatever size you'd like. And I want to give a border. So if we go to the Layout tab, you'll see there's a margin property. And let's change that to 10, which gives a little bit of white space all the way around that text object. We'll move that over to the left. And we can also lock that because we're not going to have to change that again. Our next step is to position the background silhouettes. So we want to get the 5 images, low 1 through low 5. They're the pale yellow ones. And first off, just put them out on your stage. We'll use the alignment tools to get them to line up right. So first worry about where your number 1 is and where your 5 is, so that they're sort of showing the left and right edges. Then use the Shift key to click on all 5 images. And then go to Align. And first, say Align the tops, so they're all lined up that way. And then go to Align, Distribute, Center Horizontal. There they are. So that's our basic placement of all those images. And now we'll take the number 1 GIF, the bright yellow one that corresponds to 1. Now we could move that around and try to line it up exactly on top of the pale yellow one, but we'd never be quite right. This is a great place to use bindings. So we want to just go to our number 1 low and bind location XYR from one of those images to the other. And so basically we're saying these need to be at exactly the same place. So we can do the same thing. We'll grab 2 and bind low 2, the location XYR, to the location XYR of the bright yellow 2. Okay? So go ahead and finish that. You want to pause this for a moment, and I want to show you though something interesting. It matters which way you drag those. So if we would go from the bright yellow location to bind it to the pale yellow one here on 5, notice that the pale yellow one goes up to match where the bright one is. That is, the one you drag from is the value you're going to keep. So as you do this, you want to make sure you drag from the pale yellow one, which has been placed appropriately, to the bright yellow one. And so that's why the yellow ones are snapping to those initial ones we had placed. Okay, so in each case, we've got those. And now one other thing we want to do is select 2, 3, 4, and 5 by shift clicking and switch hide on run. You can do that with the inspector in one swoop so that they're not going to show up until later on. Okay, now our next step is to start creating the drag and drop pairs. So we'll just take 1980 Betty as our first one, and we want to set up a relationship for her to be drag and dropped on each of these bright yellow pictures. So first we'll set her to be movable. That's the first thing you do whenever you start a drag and drop. It's easy to forget and it can screw things up later. So make it movable, and then put your message center in a place you're going to be able to view it easily. Now we're ready to set the pair. Go to the Out section, click Drag and Drop, and you'll see there's a dropped on ribbon. Click on the blank, and then click on the target area, which in this case is 1.gif. That sets up the pairing. Now we just have to say, what do we want to do when the user has made that target? And what we want to do is snap the picture of Betty to exactly where the place is. And so that is setting the location XYR. So we create a custom setter, and now we have to say, where are we going to put it? Well, we want it to go exactly where the 1 GIF is, so we'll drag from location XYR on 1 and link it to that location XYR ribbon underneath our location setter. So that's saying as soon as you drop this, snap Betty to the place of number 1. Now we want to do a couple other things. We want to hide that number 1 target because we don't want any of the other pictures to snap to it, so we're going to hide it. And then we want to now make number 2 available. Remember, we set those to hide on run, so now we're going to show target number 2. So we'll wire from dropped on number 1 to the display in of show. So we'll run this and test it. We'll drag Betty to number 1, release it, it snaps to place, and number 2 is shown. So it's doing exactly what we want. Now we just sort of have to set up targets for Betty to each of the other target areas. So we're going to go to Out, click on Drag and Drop, and you'll see a new blank dropped on ribbon, and we're going to set this up to match number 2. And here we're just going to exactly repeat the same process we did before. On drop, we're going to set the location XYR, so we need yet another setter. And then we're going to set its destination to the location of number 2 GIF. So we're going to wire from location XYR up to the location XYR in our setter. Then we're going to hide the bright yellow number 2 GIF image. And we're going to show number 3. Now let's run this and see that they both work. Now we can drag to 2 and hides and number 3 shows up. So we're going to have to do some other stuff to fix that ultimately, but let's continue on making the same links from this picture of Betty to number 3, 4, and 5. Of course, the only difference in 5, you won't be showing anything afterwards. So you might want to pause this, and you can see what you want to do is build up 5 drop areas. And with each one, it's triggering the next. You can see that all 5 work. You want to test that. Now, since everything's working, we're ready to move on. Now, one last little thing we want to fix is that once Betty gets snapped to one of the places, we want to lock her there so you can't move her again. So we're going to go from dropped on number 1 and set a new setter to say we need to change the movable property to false. So we wire there, it creates a new setter, a new custom in, and we want to set that to movable false. So now when we drop Betty, we can't do it again. And we want to do that for each one of those targets. So from dropped on 2, 3, 4, and 5, go ahead and wire from that dropped on out up to your movable custom setter. With all these wires, it starts getting a little bit difficult to follow, so be careful and do it in order. And notice that sometimes the wires are on one side versus the other of your message center. It doesn't matter which it goes, but Zebra will choose for you. So let's try that. So we'll run it, and now now we can't move her. Now another thing we want to do is that right now we've only set up the correct or anticipated targets, but sometimes people may drop it in thin air, and so we want to create one more drag and drop, which is a putback. And if we leave a blank ribbon, that's going to serve as a catch-all that if you drop it anywhere other than on those targets, and then we want to wire that to putback, which is in. So now with putback, if I drop it anywhere on the screen, it goes back to where it started from. But then when I hit a target, it triggers that. So we're good to now duplicate this for each of the other pictures of Betty. Now the easiest thing is to Alt-drag to create a copy of that, and it creates another version with all the same functionality. And then all we need to do is replace that image, and now it has all the functionality that the original had. And so it's very, very quick to duplicate all this logic once you have it set up. So now just do that 3 more times, and in each case grab a new picture of Betty, replace it, and all the functionality will work. So it's astounding how quickly you can duplicate a rather complex interaction simply by replacing the images. So we have one more to do. We'll get our last 1965 Betty on the screen. And we can position them however we want. Notice that doesn't affect any of the functionality. And now let's run it. We should see that we could put these in any order here. I'll do it the correct way. They'll all snap to place. But notice what we have to do is now do some answer judging, because I actually didn't get these in quite the right order. So we're going to figure out how can we keep track of the correct matches. We're going to do that using checkboxes. We're going to create a checkbox that corresponds to each of the 5 target areas. Now you can either draw them, or I like to Alt-drag because it's a little quicker to create multiples of the same sort of object. And then I'll name these in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now click on them to make sure that none of them are checked, because the first status should be unchecked, and we're going to mark those that we get correct. So we need to pair each of the faces with the correct location. So we'll start with 1955 because that's the correct one for block 1. So we're going to link from dropped on 1 to checkbox number 1. And that's under the do, mark check, and link that. So when you put 1955 in number 1, it'll check that box. Now 1965 is the correct answer for number 2, so we'll do the similar thing to link dropped on number 2 to check. 1972 Betty is the correct answer for target number 3. Make sure that you're wiring to the in under checked. You notice there's the property checked, which is different than the input trigger. 1980 Betty is the one for target 4. and 1996 Betty is the target for number 5. Okay, let's give this a try. We'll put some correct and incorrect. You see now we checked the first one. When we get the second one wrong, it doesn't check. The third one wrong, it doesn't check. And then we get the fourth one correct and the fifth one correct. So you can see how it's keeping track of which of the targets we've matched correctly. Now the next step will be to create an answer table that will track if we get all the correct answers going. So click on the answer table tool and create a table. And now what we're going to do is link the checked values of each of these checkboxes as the things we're going to be judging. So from number 1, wire from checked to the property line in the answer table, and do that for each of your checkboxes so that we're going to have 5 judged properties linked to our answer table. You can do these in any order. Of course, it makes the most sense to do them in sequential order so you can keep track of them better. So we've got all 5 checkboxes, and we want to say that the correct answers of all 5 of these are checked. So just check in the column number 1. And now that will be the correct choice. And then we'll do another one, which is if anything else happens, we'll just leave that blank. Because a blank cell in an answer table matches anything. Now we need to do something. We're going to show values. So go to the inspector with your answer table set and say show values. And we're going to create a text box that will tell us feedback. So create that text object. We'll just, as a placeholder, call it feedback here for the moment, and we will format it appropriate. Give it a white background using the inspector. Give it a margin so it sort of matches our text box right above it. Give it a shadow. Adjust the edges. And now, based on which column in that answer table we match, either number 1, which is everything's correct, or 2, which is anything else, we want to set the text value. So we're going to link the text styled property on that text object to our value in the answer table. And so in column 1, we want to say great job, or you can type whatever message you like. And in the second column, which is incorrect, type incorrect. Again, you can type however long a statement you want there, but when we match those patterns, it's going to set the text value. Now we're going to start it with a blank text object, so let's delete that so that there isn't that placeholder text to begin with. And we'll also create a submit button that the user clicks when they're ready to have their answer judged. So create a button, call it submit, and when we submit that, we're going to judge our answer table. So when the button's pressed, we're going to wire out to the gavel image at the bottom of the answer table, which says, okay, judge the answers. If you don't do that, it sort of judges perpetually, and we don't want to judge until the learner has all their answers in place. And we're then going to show the feedback message, and we want to make sure that doesn't show until you actually hit judge, so we're going to hide on run. So it's not going to show up until the learner hits submit. That will set the message, and then we'll see how we did. So let's run it. So far, so good. I've done everything right. When I submit, I ought to get a correct feedback. There we go. Great job. So it matched all 5. Let's try it again and make an error and see that it works. So I'll just put these in whatever order. Notice we're getting some correct, but not all of them. When I submit, we get incorrect. So our answer table is working just as we hoped it would. Well, that concludes this exercise, but I want to encourage you to try to make some enhancements. As one suggestion, here we added a help button. So if you're not quite sure what to do, you can hit help. It shows you a picture of the first ladies that gives you a hint of what the styles are at each time. That stays up as you keep working. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is give some more sophisticated answer judging, and that when you judge your answer, it tells you how many of your answers are correct and puts those that are incorrect back in place and lets you continue. You're going to want to use a counter to keep track of how many are correct and which ones in specific are correct to put those back in order to get them in the right case. So, whether you do those enhancements or not, the basic fabric of this interaction I think is one that you'll find very useful and is quite straightforward to build using ZebraZapps. So thanks for spending the time, and join me for my next interaction video.